Welcome to the AfroNarc Podcast. My name is Lyric, and I'm grateful that you are here. The AfroNarc Podcast is a digital safe space curated to bring together a community of individuals who are survivors of narcissistic abuse. The stories that you will hear on this podcast are largely based in Black and Brown communities. However, this is an inclusive space. All are welcome. Some may be entertained, some will be educated, and others may be offended. This podcast is for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute psychological, medical, or legal advice. The views expressed here do not represent any entity, organization, government, religion, culture, or tradition in particular. The AfroNarc Podcast is a survivor's epilogue, not a diagnostic tool. While we discuss narcissistic abuse and family dynamics, all commentary is based on personal interpretation, research and data, cultural critique, observations, and individuals' lived experiences. This is my story, and I own the rights to it. In this episode, we are going to be talking about the classical definitions and the cultural manifestations of narcissism. I chose to say "and" instead of "versus" because I don't think that these two things work against each other. I think that these two things work in tandem with each other, but they manifest themselves in different ways based on the community in which these behaviours are being exuded. Further to that, I also believe that it is important for all groups, all cultures, traditions, literally anybody who is interested or involved in this field of learning to understand the cultural definitions and the cultural manifestations of narcissism. So, picking up where we left off in episode 2, moving on to the 6th classical definition of narcissism. This manifests itself in the display of envy of others, or a belief that others are envious of them. And this really is an interesting one in the classical sense, because how this would play out, for example, on a TV show would possibly be a character who is a traditional heterosexual male in a traditional marriage who owns a local bakery, and another baker moves a couple of streets down, and then this man who owns the bakery begins to believe that that other person opened up their bakery because they're jealous of their success and they want to steal their customers from them. Whilst in an economic, logical sense, that might be true, a narcissist will take this kind of situation to the farthest extent. Now, in comparison to the cultural manifestation of this in an ethnic household, it would look like jealous parenting. And this is when parents compete with their children, but in very covert ways. And the words covert and overt are words that you're going to hear me talking about a lot, because my story involves a lot of covert narcissism from one of my parental figures. Parents competing with their children, blocking their growth or minimizing their success. What is really interesting about this in ethnic households is that it almost blurs the line between narcissism and survival, because a lot of the ways in which narcissism manifests itself in culturally diverse communities or ethnic households in particular might look like it's the ego, but really it is a form of narcissism. The next point in the classical section is A narcissistic person might display arrogant or haughty behaviors, acting superior and dismissive of others. And this aligns with the cultural manifestation, where it would look like somebody who believes that everyone else is beneath us. People who have a superiority complex that is rooted in respectability politics and post-colonial performance. So the idea of an ethnic person living their lives subconsciously or consciously in tandem with the awareness that they're living underneath the so-called white gaze. And this leads to a performance, so to speak. They might want to be the most successful person in their family, or they might have been raised in a culture where they're the first person who's able to go to university or college. And what that person might end up excelling and being the top of their class consistently. And it's not necessarily because that person has a desire to be successful, to be the best, to be the highest attaining student in that environment. What it is it's a performance that is rooted in survival, because it's been indoctrinated within them by their community that our survival literally depends on you. And if that person does end up being successful and taking care of the family, they can be at risk of developing narcissistic traits. Then that could lead to the grandiose ego if that self-pride of their achievements does not remain checked. Now, the next part with the classical definition is one's preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success or power. Don't we all know this person in one way or the other? What that looks like in the cultural manifestation of that in an ethnic household would be parents who are consistently laboring their children by projecting their own unfulfilled dreams. Okay? Parents who consistently labor their own children with their own unfulfilled dreams, and the language around that would sound something like, you are going to be a doctor. You are going to go to America and study law. You will be the first engineer in our family. These things are projections of one's unfulfilled dreams onto their children. And again, one could argue that this is complex because it is rooted in structures that the parents have a very little power over. Sometimes you're dealing with parents or grandparents or great-grandparents who are uneducated themselves, and they really do feel and they really do know, based on anecdotal evidence, that if one of us makes it out and gets an education, then the rest of us are going to be okay. So I do not think that the intention is always bad. But no matter what the intention is, the consequence is that that child feels disempowered, they lose their autonomy, and they live out the unfulfilled dreams of those who came before them. Now there are 2 points left in the classical section and 2 points left in the cultural manifestation section. So in the classical section, the next point, which will be number 9, is an individual with NPD will display a fragile self-esteem beneath the grandiose surface. So underneath this huge, grandiose, boastful, entitled persona lies often an individual who has such low self-esteem that the only way that they can build themselves up, the only way that they can maintain any semblance of power, structure, or authority in other people's lives is to perform. It's a performance at the end of the day. It is a performance. They know what they're doing. It is not accidental. They know that if I say this to this person in this context or at this time, this is how that person will react. Okay? And what that looks like in an ethnic household is it looks like unhealed generational trauma. Call it what it is. We all know this. We've all read about it, heard about it, or seen it in person. Some of us are living with it right now. The manifestation in terms of behavior with this in an ethnic household would be criticisms that trigger rage. Have you ever seen or been in a situation where something that seemed so small and so minute to an observer or to a victim be triggered an immense amount of rage in the narcissist, an unjustifiably insane amount of rage? And another thing that narcissists are great at doing is using silence as a tool. They use silence as a tool. Or shame. They love to use shame. They shame the scapegoats. And they use the flying monkeys and the golden children to do things like that. And finally, I'm excited to be here. We are at number 10. So, number 10 in the classical definition is manipulative behaviors that are used to control others. So manipulation will come up again and again and again in both the classical and the cultural definitions. The cultural manifestation of manipulative behaviors would look like an individual who uses guilt as currency. And this could look like somebody who uses religion, family legacy. What will people say? What will the neighbors think? What if they see you wearing that? What if they know that you're feeling this way? Do not tell anybody that you're feeling that way. They use guilt as currency to emotionally trap you. And this happens often when, actually, which is the saddest thing about it, it often happens when the victim reaches out to the narcissist, whether it is to gain clarity over a situation, to express how they're feeling, to discuss an idea that they might have. More often than not, the narcissist will use guilt as a currency by saying, I understand that you really want to study politics, but your aunties and uncles have all been saving up for you to become a doctor. If you go and study politics, what will people say? Or everyone else in this family is a nurse. Why do you want to go into acting? Why do you want to make music? So, ladies and gentlemen, we have reached the end of the 10 classical and 10 cultural manifestations of narcissistic personality disorder. As promised in intro episode 2, I am going to give you a fun fact about classical narcissism and a fun fact about cultural manifestations in ethnic households. So, buckle up and get ready for this fun fact. Fun fact number 1. Did you know that individuals, citizens, the general population, most of us have narcissistic traits? Now, the difference between having narcissistic traits and being diagnosed is narcissistic traits are used by individuals who are emotionally balanced in ways that serve themselves and others. They are not used to coerce, manipulate, intimidate, berate, or infringe upon the rights of others. Somebody with classical NPD would consistently display a lack of empathy, which is that they cannot or they will not recognize other people's feelings. This sometimes is necessary to display in some social situations. For example, you are driving down in the parking lot of your local supermarket. You see a mother who is carrying a baby in her arms, and she is also pushing a cart with food, and she has a toddler who's about 4 years old on one of those connecting rope things. Sorry, I do not have any toddlers around me. I forgot what they're called. But the mother has basically a baby in her arms, a trolley full of food, and she's trying to manage holding another child. And then as you're driving past slowly in your car, you witness that this mother has had her purse stolen, basically. So someone has come and they have grabbed the purse and they're running away with it. And you can see that this is just the worst thing that could have happened to her right now. Worst thing that can happen to literally anybody, but especially a mother in that situation. And because you are in your car, you have the option of stopping the thief. Now, how far you take that stopping the thief is down to you. But let's say, for example, you rev your engine and then you bump him slowly, just enough so that it kind of destabilizes him. He falls and then the purse falls on the floor. You get out of the car and you get the purse, take it back to the lady. One might argue that in that particular instance, you showed a lack of empathy towards the person who you hit with your car, right? There was no empathy there whatsoever. All your empathy was to the mother. In that situation, you wouldn't call that person who stopped the thief a narcissist just because they showed a lack of empathy. Sometimes it is necessary in situations. When it becomes narcissism is when it happens over a prolonged period of time and it is sustained and it is managed. And when I say managed, this is more in reference to narcissists who have covert narcissistic personality disorder, because they are excellent at managing their behavior. They're the kind of people who, if you spoke to their outside community, everyone would say that they're kind, they're incredible, they're helpful, they're such great communicators, they're emotionally balanced, they're such great team leaders. But if you were to speak to the people in their household, they might say that she ignores me when she's upset, she doesn't really feed me, or he always shouts, he's always angry, so there you go. The thing with narcissism in ethnic households is that it is really complex, because when we're talking about ethnicity, we're talking about the global majority of the world, okay? So we're talking here about a very, very, very diverse mix of people. And narcissism will look different in each and every community that a Black and brown person comes from. There definitely will be some trends amongst different cultures, different religions, different communities. However, it manifests completely differently in some cultures. For example, there are some cultures where it is not encouraged for men to look at women who they are not married to in their eyes. So if a man from that culture was to go to another African culture where it is encouraged for men to look at women in their eyes, and let's say that it's a man and a woman working together, the man never makes eye contact, and the woman does not understand that he's not supposed to. The woman could very well go home every day upset that there's this man who works at my job, he never makes eye contact with me when we're working together, but she's labeling it as narcissism or a narcissistic trait. But he has no intention to offend her. So this topic is very varied. It's so deep. The more that I talk about it, the more excited I get. I will round this off for now to let you know that I am going to start recording my actual story in the first official episode of the AfroNarc Podcast. And in this episode, I explore my childhood. And all I can say is get ready, because it's a long story. I have always wanted to write a book about it. And I'm really happy that now I get to give an audio commentary on what happened and how I ended up here and how I ended up being who I am. I will catch you on TikTok or Instagram at the AfroNarc Poddy, or on Spotify and YouTube at AfroNarc Podcast. Thank you for listening.